20 episodes to figure that out.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, to like just shoot the shit until people actually start watching it.
The scheduling on this, is probably such that. Oh, by the way, did you put the link, Ernesto, for the?
I put it on the Facebook group, and I'm distributing it on Discords, on Lefty Discord, and so on.
Cool. This one, because of the time error, this one might be a bit less frequented than other ones. But yeah. So we are here at Zero Book's basement, discussing capital. There you go, 8 people. And we'll be 9. We'll be discussing the first half of the appendix of Capital. And that stretches in the Ben Folks Penguin edition of the text. That stretches from pages. What were the page numbers? Do you have them? That stretches from pages 944 to 1018. Yeah. So what this is again the first half of the appendix of Capital, and what this focuses on in large part, I think, is the specificity of the capitalist mode of production, right? And I say production deliberately because we're really looking here more at the domain of production than circulation, right? So markets have existed for a very long time. Right,
Right.
But what Marx stresses here is that within the capitalist mode of production, there's a big difference that takes hold at the level of production, and that difference owes to the way that production becomes structured in order to facilitate the circulation of capital. Right. So capital, and it's actually said in this chapter, capital refers to any investments which are made with the goal of yielding profit, right? So the idea is for money to valorize itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in past societies, you had certain sort of inlets or individuals who did make these kinds of investments, but it hadn't become dominant as a way of functioning as a society. So once it achieves that kind of hegemony, that kind of dominance, you have a change implemented whereby production, and the archetypal example of this is sort of the factory, right, or the site of industrial production. Production itself becomes entirely structured, right, so as to facilitate capital valorization, right? And where does capital valorization come from fundamentally? Well, it comes from the discrepancy between the value that's received by a laborer for their work and the value they actually create. Right, surplus value, right?
Right.
So this is very important, I think, in terms of, it seems to me that a big thing motivating this was an attempt to clarify certain questions with respect to historical categories, right? Because Marx saw bourgeois economists like capitalists, or capitalist or bourgeois economists. What he saw was that they had a strong tendency to generalize the capitalist mode of production to say, well, people have always made things, so capitalism sort of always existed, right? Well, Marx is saying, well, yeah, people made things, but they didn't make things that way.
Yeah,
it's a difference, and we can't underestimate that difference. I'm channeling Jordan Peterson here. So you can think of this as being very important also to sort of like this appendix to sort of like left communist readings of Marx, because like if we think of left communism as being like communization theory as being related to value form conceptions of Marxism, right? Part of the really important idea there is that the category of labor, as we conceive it, is historically structured. So like like Postone, for example, says that in traditional Marxism, labor is seen as a vector of emancipation. But actually, if we examine these passages closely enough, what we find is that labor, as we understand it, is a specific consequence of capitalist organization, right? Now, that's very debatable.
Yeah. Well, I think what the appendix lays out, and I accidentally read the Marxist.org one, which is different than this, and then I went back to this one, the Penguin one. But the capitalist mode of production makes it so that labor is determined through the capitalist mode of production rather than simply the immediate immediate labor's immediate creation, such as like it's not an immediate circuit like exchange between two commodities is an immediate circuit. It's not, because there is this kind of, in the Lacanian sense, big other, but it's like a material big other of capitalist production, global capitalist production. It takes away the possibility of the immediate circuit of creation and makes labor a function of the capitalist. I believe. And then I check in with Conrad, and then I go, Conrad.
Yeah, that scans to me. I mean, I think like we actually had a discussion with
Conrad's supposed to know.
We actually had a discussion about this in the group the other day. Our SJW group, as I've now discovered.
I did like that comment.
Okay, went wild. Yeah. No, he's known for like that's Mohammed Salami. So he runs I believe if I get the name right, the New Center for Research and Practice, which is really important for kind of.
He was in our group calling it a SJW group. Was he? Really?
Yeah. He's known for being very flamboyant. He has interesting views. So, for example, he said himself that like often people will, you have the idea of mansplaining. So his name's Mohammed. So people say mo-splaining is actually a phrase apparently that's used at the office. So he's quite an interesting guy. So I don't begrudge him. I think he looked at some of the recent things, but I just wanted to go on. That sounds right, Eliot. I think. What I think, so we had a debate about this in the group the other day because I quoted Jacques Bidet, right? And Jacques Bidet, he has critiqued sort of Postone, right? This idea, because let's be clear, like Postone reads this kind of thing in a certain way, right? So for Postone, you have like just like production, right? And there's no real temporal organization of production to support the creation of value. Like that's how, in markets that are pre-capitalist, right? So he says like, oh, well, yeah, there's time. Prior to capitalism, there was time, but it was just like the time of events, like the time it takes to cook rice or, something. I think he literally says that. A paternoster. He says the time it takes to cook a paternoster, and I still don't know for the love of God, what a paternoster is. But I Googled it. I've been trying to figure it out. If someone knows what a paternoster is, they can tell me. But then he's like, well, then capitalism, the capitalist mode of production comes into existence, and then production becomes structured in conformance with the commodity form, right? Now,
yes,
because I mean, you look at a society like ancient Egypt, where there was like dams, granaries, all of this, right? And it's like, would you really say that production wasn't structured in conformance with the commodity form in some way? So Jacques Bidet says, well, Postone kind of mixes up these categories. So what he fails to realize is that labor is abstracted progressively. So you have you have labor early on in societies where they have like tools that kind of become streamlined on that basis. And then you have market labor, so just labor on the market. Then you have capitalist labor, which is the sort of labor that Marx is describing here. So this would be the big debate, I think, would be like, can labor, like proper category of labor, can it really even be said to exist before capitalism, right? And this is a big problem because Marx says like, well, capitalism constitutes production as we understand it, but he also says, Marx and Engels throughout their writings, they'll also often speak in this way, like, labor is like a transhistorical, like a vector of emancipation.
Yeah. Is there any difference between? I guess there's a difference between labor and the capitalist mode of production, and just simply work, somebody working. Right.
Well, yeah. So that's one periodization you can use, but I would actually I prefer Bidet's tripartite periodization because I think part of the problem with work is you kind of get into the same thing where it's like capitalism, like labor, everything else work. And it's like, I don't know if I don't know if you can just use a periodization that's that kind of easy, right, to do that.
Right. Well, labor is making nature into, in some sense, but there's lots of holes in this. One of the definitions of labor is making nature into something used by a man. Ender, what did you just pull up, Conrad?
Oh, he just said a paternoster for me is a kind of elevator. We had one of those in my uni. Okay, well,
I don't know, sir.
So I don't think pre-capitalist time was the time of making elevators, but yeah.
It could have been. You never know.
Yeah.
With those ancient aliens.
Yeah.
You never know what kind of elevators.
Elevator to the skies, man.
Yeah.
What do you continue though, Elliot?
Sorry, what now?
Continue though, you were saying.
I don't know. I was saying something and then something flashed. Remind me, Conrad.
I don't know. You got to tell me what you were saying. I can't summarize it. It wasn't really an articulated point yet.
Yeah, I got distracted. Oh yeah, it was labor, and then the nature of labor and how. See, I think I have a problem with I think the Spinozan idea of kind of formalizing everything. It's like this is labor with a capital L means it's under capital. It's like, okay, what is an essential quality of labor? You can say there's work, which is like effort. There's an effort put into something which creates something to create something, right? That's just a sort of effort, the effort of creation. So you have this sort of general idea of the effort of creation, and then to what extent should you separate labor from just the effort of creation? I think labor posits this sort of second, like Tory capitalist kind of person, right? So once you're laboring, you're like laboring for someone, or you're laboring within a machine more so. Like you can cook yourself dinner or your family dinner, and you're putting effort towards a result. But once you're within this sort of mechanism, you're kind of a laborer. There's a sort of modern, whether you're building pyramids in Egypt, I don't know if it was all slaves. Might have been.
No, it wasn't. It was
yeah.
actually corvée labor, by the way, which is really
okay.
interesting because that's temporal labor, right? As well. Anyway,
what kind of labor was so that's important because I think that adds the point. What kind of labor was creation of the pyramids?
It was the pyramids were created with a back, was their word, which is a corvée. So everybody in ancient Egypt had to perform like a certain amount of public service. Yeah. So for people, it depended on your social class, what kind of service that would be. But yeah. So, and actually someone posted something in our group.
Yeah, about a strike,
like
right?
Strike in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So all of this, I hope all of this goes to show why I'm quite skeptical about the notion that the commodity form has like no determinate effects on production before capitalism, right?
How so?
Yeah. I mean, what determines social strata? Because the social relations determines the material relations, determines the nature of the commodity, and it's sort of in the commodity fetish. So I wonder what determines social relations then, if not some sort of wealth, right? Wealth seems to be present in ancient Egypt and determines social class, right? And it also is present now.
Yeah.
And I wonder what
well, they were generating. They were generating actual surpluses, right? They had big agricultural surpluses, for example. So the goal was that, but it wasn't like the whole society wasn't organized around the idea of like valorization for valorization's sake. But you have a strong idea of like, let's get, this is why they had these granaries and they put the agricultural surpluses in the granaries. And that was actually the basis of trade, right? Because then that's how ancient Egypt got so powerful, because they were actually just export their stuff, right? And have trade surpluses, right? So
they had the good stuff, grain.
Yeah. Well, back then, and that had everything to do with the. I mean, we shouldn't talk as if it's like the Nile is just the Nile is so fertile. I mean, like there was a process of kind of cultivation, and even they had geometry develops, I think, from measuring plots of land for taxation.
Yeah.
After the Nile floods and back and forth, but the Nile was a wonderful natural resource.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of engendering agricultural productivity. So, I mean, in ancient Egypt, like the ancient Egyptian empire, I would say the basis of it is the systemic cultivation of those natural, very, very significant natural resources which already existed, soil fertility and so on, and the creation of a regime where they were actually generating productive surpluses and then applying them to create pyramids, to create public service, to create all of this, right? This sort of division of labor and upper class, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a system of natural resources. Then there's the labor, which is required to the modernization, you could say, or whatever, even for, I'm using this incorrectly, but the modernization of, you could say, Egyptians is to create these natural resources into this agricultural surplus, which is then used for trade. And the effectiveness of that technology, I think, probably would be a better phrase, not modernization, but technology is the creation of this product, right? And then somewhere within all that, there's social classes and social relations. And I wonder what the relation between the sort of these the social classes then come to, between that and then the technology which produces surplus grain, and how it intensifies. Because I think there's hierarchy is sort of, now I'm doing Peterson. Hierarchy is sort of naturally present within families. Right. It's present within animals in terms of just basic like familial hierarchy. You could say like small group hierarchy, but then it intensifies, right, under technology. So technology causes maybe the intensification of hierarchy into these forms of class hierarchy in order to produce whatever surplus value of the day is.
Surplus product, yeah.
Surplus product, yeah. So I wonder what is to be done without ridding ourselves of technology, which technology probably has the tendency to increase stratification and intensify stratification, rather. What is the communist mode of production which works against that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because, like, I don't think we should clarify maybe the difference between capitalism and earlier modes of production in terms of the relationship to technology. So, and I'm going to agree with what you're saying, but I just want to make this clarification. So in like ancient Egypt, you had like the ox-drawn plow and stuff. You did have technological developments that were initiated, but Marx points out that the invention of technology becomes methodological under capitalism. And specifically under capitalism, once capitalism comes to favor the production of what he calls relative surplus value, right? So even in the early stage of capitalism, Marx says it's just formally different than what came before it, because it's really just about squeezing more surplus labor time out of people, right? But in the higher stage of capitalism, right, the goal is to actually, to apply technology, right, in order to increase productivity, right? That's the idea. And Marx also points out here that as productivity increases, there's a tendency for the share of surplus value to actually go up, right? But again, right, that this is complicated, because then we get into the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, right, and issues with constant capital. So but I mean, obviously people are introducing technology for a reason.
Yeah. Well, it's a quality of life improvement, but then you have to go back to class once again and see what exactly does quality of life improvement mean for proletarians, for, you could say, petty bourgeois, and then grand bourgeois. Like what does quality of life improvement really mean?
But that's not. But technology is not quality of life improvement. Like technology, because the tendency of.
I mean, I think that's an idea to some extent.
It's an idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's an idea that technology equals quality of life improvement.
Well,
it's an inductive idea.
If you redistribute the productive gains created by technology, that will increase the quality of life. But that presupposes the redistribution, right? Always. And it would seem to me that the immediate consequence of the capitalist mode, the introduction of the capitalist mode of production as a mode of production that, in its stage of focus on relative surplus value, that constantly revolutionizes itself, was actually an immediate depression in people's living standards, because they hadn't devised the political mechanisms to actually force that redistribution, right?
Right.
This is like a very, very common fallacy, not just as regards technology, but like if you read Milton Friedman, for example, he'll say it's really interesting, because he'll be like, capitalism has created all this equality and all this wealth. And it's like, well, and the book's like an argument for sort of like unfettered very, very deregulated kind of capitalism. But it's like the reason that it's done that is because of like working class struggles and like extensive wealth redistribution. And he was writing when the tax for the rich was like 90%.
Yeah, I was watching a debate between Richard Wolff and some libertarian guy, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was pushing the same thing. And Wolff was like, where's your historical, like, do you know anything about history? Anything at all? It's pretty funny.
Well, this would be Marx's point, right? That the bourgeois argument is always based on the obfuscation of these kind of historical categories, right?
Yeah, to this day, yeah, definitely.
But I just want to say about technology, all I want to say is that, so one obvious advantage, you're gonna use, like, capitalism has to use. So Marx points out, actually, he says, like, when you get a new technology and other people don't have it, then the productivity of that technology is basically giving you like surplus labor time. That's not really labor time. It's increasing. You're able to extract, right, higher profits.
Yeah.
Because, right. But then everyone else starts to use the same thing. So the point is, the immediate consequence of technology is to actually raise, right, profits. But the problem is the actual. There's like an inertia. There's like there's a kind of process of how do I say, entropic sort of process.
Yeah. Eventually, the socially necessary labor time, crunches down, right? As different factories in whatever market you are, they eventually also add those technologies to their own processes. I'll give you an example. The factory I work at right now, we've been innovating in that regard. We've been importing machines from China, specifically to cut our costs and to up our productivity. And our competition isn't. So that is giving us profits that they aren't getting. But when they add all of those machines to their own processes, we're all going to lose
Hopefully
money.
They're not watching this. Hopefully, hopefully your guys' competition isn't watching your workers' YouTube doings, and they won't figure out to technologically upgrade from China.
That would be great.
Productivity, and they'll figure out
around the entire country, right?
And then they'll be like, "Wait a second, technology profits go into technology to increase wage labor," and they'll be like, "I'm going to write this all down." That's cool.
Yeah.
You never know.
I would love that, just a whiteboard with like all of like, one of the competitors in your company reconstructing your industrial strategy, right? Like taking notes and like out of these videos.
Bit of an Elon Musk vibe. Marx was a capitalist. He even wrote a book about it. Just the greatest troll. What a great troll post. Not that Musk is a good person, but it's just what an effective sentence. It's just so annoying.
Did you see that post too? They had like what is it? Like I posted that, like someone was like, this 1-page resume, or it's like Elon Musk's one resume shows that your resume doesn't need to be more than 1 page. And it's like, first of all, when does that guy send resumes to people? Like,
never.
You just consist of saying, "I'm fucking Elon Musk, bitch."
Yeah.
Like,
I have money. Let me invest in your company. That's his.
That's a good point too. Yeah, it's like if you're an entrepreneur who's like astoundingly rich, right? And he came from rich as well, of course. It's not exactly like you got to be out there like pounding the pavement, like, give me a job.
Not at all.
So I thought that was a little bit strange, but
yeah.
But I just want to say
idealism. It's like it's to feed the cybernetic loop of managerial bourgeois idealism, right? It's like, here's Elon Musk's resume, like he needs a resume, and it's only 1 page. Ergo, you should be brief, worker. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I just want to say though about the thing about technology. I do think though, so technology is obviously kind of
perfect. Oh, actually,
honestly, I never submit a CV. It's probably not good to know. I'm like, I should start.
The impacts of technology, like if you want, it's hard to talk about technology like absent discussing like capitalism in the value form today, because it's so connected with that, right? Like labor saving technology. I mean, this is,
I'm thinking of a cover. CVs just anyway. I mixed up a cover letter with the entire CV. My bad. Anyway, Conrad.
If you have like labor saving technology, consumer technology, I mean, the application of technology today, as Marx acknowledges, well, this is in a way the point of capital. The application of technology today is very defined by, capitalism, value, and so on. But I think it's interesting, like as a historical question, because like Eliot, you were saying like, oh, well, technology tends to, lead to like surpluses, and surpluses tend to lead to inequality, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is interesting. Like, and actually in Marx and Engels' sort of anthropological work, they argue that it was animal domestication that led to the surpluses that allowed for the first markets to be forged, as well as sort of patriarchy, because men.
I do like that he makes a callback to that here. At some point, he's talking about machines, and he just, between parentheses, he just puts animals, question mark.
Yeah. He puts animals in question mark.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting too. Well, I mean, like the thing is, like, Marx will often talk about like and machines because they're the most common sort of touchstone in terms of talking about constant capital in capital, right? Because he's talking about the industrial process, but actually, like, constant capital could be all kinds of things, right? Like, it could be like agricultural land, right? All it is it's just non-labor power, right? Which, like, some people are critical of that because, I mean, like, one guy argued like you could take any factor of production and say that's the one, as Marx does, that is the basis of value production, like it's because it's not provable, right? Which is, kind of a problem, right? It's like, the labor theory of value. We have a new article coming out about this, by the way. Matt McManus and myself, we have a new article coming out about Marx's labor theory of value in Aereo. It's like classical liberal magazine. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Our people in our group love Aereo, of course. They have
when I click your articles and then I click the ones that related articles, they're not as good.
Any thoughts on that, Eliot? You're quiet. I'm kind of worried.
Well, no, I mean, the labor value is an interesting idea. I mean, the Marx in the appendix, the incorrect appendix, which I read on Marxist.org instead of the Penguin. They were he was talking about Aristotle and the essential quality of labor, being, labor being the sort of thing which repeats in every single commodity, right? So if you look at it like, philosophically, like the ideal of labor within the commodity, is there any commodity that escapes labor? And I was actually thinking of that before we started. I was thinking about, those algorithmically generated t-shirts or throw pillows. I did a Sterner podcast, Machinic Unconscious podcast, and that'll be out next week. But he has a Fang Denomina throw pillow set, which some algorithm generated that he was able to click on. And then it was, I was like, where's the labor time in there? And ultimately you go to like, well, how is this manufactured? How is this pillow manufactured? And how are these machines operated and shipped? And you'll always find labor within a commodity. I don't think, and then there's the sort of second question, which is what happens when you get a digital commodity, right? Say like a video game company. I have the right hat. I'm like in full like fucking incel mode. It's great. I got this like fedora thing. I love this thing, honestly. I think it's pretty great. Yeah, it's just it has a little fucking. Yeah, it's just great. But yeah, so it's the right hat to talk about video games. So Perfect. If you talk about the video game, which you can have a digital product which is repeatable. So you have all this labor that goes into a commodity, but then the commodity can then be copy pasted essentially. So there's all these interesting dynamics that go into to find labor, and then to what extent labor is within these commodities. And even then you can follow the digital commodity into the machine itself, right? You can still find it within the parts in the computer, especially like the PlayStation, which was required to make the labor time was in the coding of the algorithm. To follow labor time, you can't really escape labor time. And then you get the question of quality of labor, right? Differences in expertise, right? And then what should we ascribe to differences of expertise then? So there's lots of things which these questions that technology brings to Marx specifically, like which, And you can't really escape labor time. But then, there are these sort of qualitative shifts in terms of how much training does it cost to do specific types of labor. And I believe Marx covers that in Capital somewhere. I don't recall exactly qualitative difference in labor fields. I know certainly like later writers would do that.
Yeah, he does mention the difference between quality and quantity of labor in the appendix, actually.
Yeah.
Well, the only way of dealing with, like, it's interesting about digital commodities, because the only way of actually the problem obviously with anything digital is that it's not finite. So it doesn't conform to the same logic as like something you physically produce, right? And it can be in theory, it can be infinitely reproduced.
Yeah.
Right? So,
but you need that
in theory, it has no
right?
real value on that basis. So the way you try to control it, and actually the U.S. government even said this about, they released a report on how corporations should deal with the ascent of the internet some years ago. But the way you basically try to control it is by creating artificial scarcity. So making it like another commodity of which there's an absolute finite amount, right? So, in this way, I mean, but in a way, I feel like that sort of confirms certain notions of like the importance of labor time.
Yeah.
Right. Because like, again, what it shows is that, keep in mind, Marx's labor theory of value is a circumstantial theory. It's a circumstantial theory, an historical theory of how capitalism functions. It's not a transhistorical theory in that way, right? Like you have to have actually you have to have like the organization of time and production being sufficiently uniform that you can index labor time to value before you can have like a labor theory of value, right? And for him, that really capitalism, right? So the point is like, capitalism traditionally was based on, like industrial production obviously being very central to it, and it was based on the diffusion of physical goods, right? And it's in that context in which the relationship between labor time and value is meaningful, right? But of course, again, like if you go create something and it can be infinitely disseminated,
right,
then it has no real market value on that basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a serious.
But it has a price, right? Of course. It has a price, and then it has different ways to ensure that price gets paid fidelity to.
Well, and this is like the really horrible thing of like, like late capitalism and its relationship to like the internet, right? I mean, like, Michel Serres, the French philosopher, he says like, he says like culture is like, in a sense preferable to like, the transmission of physical goods. Right? Because like if I share with you like a certain cultural idea, we both have that cultural idea, right?
Yeah.
If I give you an apple, I don't have an apple now.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like if you look at what the internet represents, right? It represents the ability to decommodify, in theory, major spheres of our economy. Right? Decommoditize major spheres of our economy, right? But capitalism has been totally obsessed since the emergence of the internet with how that potential can be obstructed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then there are legitimate problems that arise from that as well for certain segments of people. Right. Like it's like, look at recording artists, for example, like who've been dependent upon, the fact people would go and purchase albums. Now, over time, we see that, whether the people are touring more, merchandise or whatever, that, people are able to adapt. Right. But I'm just saying that I'm not also saying like it's capital is the main issue here, but there are knock-on effects for certain groups of people which are negative in the immediate wake of that technological change, right?
Yeah.
But it was funny, like with like Napster, right? Do you guys remember when Napster came out?
Yeah, I had Napster, and then I was very upset when I kept refreshing the page. I remember when it got shut down. I said, "What's happening?"
Yeah. I mean, they switched it to like a pay thing, didn't they? It was like proto.
Now it's a pay thing, but initially it said it just like gave this message, and I didn't quite understand what was happening because I was still in middle school, so I was like refreshing Napster, like why isn't it working? Like, what's happening?
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's
go
like
on.
I was
What
just gonna
about
say with
Yeah.
Napster, it's like with that was interesting because like it shows you, this is Marx's point, like people confuse the inscription of things within capitalism with the things themselves, right? So
Yeah.
like I remember when Napster came out, people were like, this is the end of music, you know,
Yeah.
like there's not going to be any more music, like you know, notes moving in time and space, you know, audible notes, it's the end, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, obviously this is like, you know, no, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that was sort of, people were speaking quite apocalyptically.
I mean,
Yeah.
they said the same thing about cassette tapes, right?
Oh yeah. That people recording cassette tapes would be the end of yeah. Well, and it's funny, right? Because like it's like there's also, you know, if we're talking about art, it's like there's serious. Now, I'm not saying it's always bad to like, you know, for capital to like support forms of art in certain ways, but there are serious liabilities associated with that too, right? Look at video games. It's not like they're more creative now, mainstream games, than they were like 20 years ago, or better. They're worse. I think
They're
if
bigger.
anything.
Totally.
They're categorically better, but like creatively worse.
No, I said
Like,
bigger. They're bigger.
bigger, yeah. Well, and this is a consequence, right? Because if you put $30 million into making a game, you have to sell a lot to like, you know, make even like 100% profit, right? And it's not like games are, you know, like I basically did some rough mathematical calculations, and I figured out that for the profit rate of games to be the same today as it was in like 1992, you would have to charge about 600 euros for each game.
Oh wow.
Right? So no surprise that, you know, like Konami is just like, fuck making Metal Gear Solid games, let's just get into mobile stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to make money, make
What are the
bajillions.
names? How is it called? The gashapon or whatever?
The what?
The slot machines in Japan. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the casino. Yeah, I mean that's how you make money. Look at like fucking Candy Crush, right? And you know, recently we talked about this, like Microsoft bought Bethesda,
Right.
ZeniMax, like, and
For
that's like
billions of dollars, right?
Sorry,
Billions of dollars, right?
$7.5 billion. Yeah, but what was interesting about that, like people are going on about how big a deal this is, but it also shows you like how people like I think hardcore gamers are a little bit discrepant in their interests with like the main commercial vectors of the industry. The actually the highest, the most valuable acquisition of a gaming company ever was not that. That was second. It was a Finnish mobile developer that was acquired by a Chinese company called Tencent a few years ago, 8.6 billion. Right, and that's what I'm saying. It's like.
Ender, once again, says coding is labor to create a machine that can be copied without much effort. The effort is planning and debugging. Yes, copyright. So now copyright enforcement is
Well,
like
they've done
is such.
I don't like the internet anymore, like because they've done a really good job, like getting people to pay for shit. Like,
Yeah, really.
You know, I don't really. And there's things I just won't do on principle. It's like I'll be like talking to people, and I'll be like, yeah, did you see this? You know, did you see this new? It's so weird. Like I talk to people, be like, did you see this new movie? And they'll be like, like no, like I don't have it on like Netflix. Like, you know, how could I get that? And I'm just like, how?
You steal it.
You find
How?
it.
Like,
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of, I also find it
even
interesting. Yeah, that's
I was gonna say even the best ways to steal things cost money now.
that's
get
what
a
I
good-
was gonna say. Now,
Yeah, to get a
instead
good
of-
VPN. But
yeah,
there's also
VPN
good cable.
and
Like
private
cable stealing
trackers.
has gotten a lot better. I don't do it, but I know people who do it. Like there's like you have like there's like a setup. No, I really don't do it. That's fine. You like have a VPN plus these other sort of things, and you can you have a full every pay-per-view thing, every whatever, every sports game. People can have setups with like these crazy
but
setups.
even then, like right now, okay, so Ender's talking about uTorrent, right?
Yeah.
But right now, if you wanna torrent stuff, it's not like 5 or 10 years ago. 5 or 10 years ago, you could easily torrent anything, and nowadays the good torrents are stuck behind private trackers.
Is that true?
I mean, you can still download pretty much anything, but the real, like for example, custom Windows builds, which I used to download for like really shitty laptops and stuff like that, Like those don't exist publicly anymore. You have to go to a private tracker. Music, TV shows, all of those.
At the same time, though, you do have to say that, like, while there's been a tendency to like kind of enclose certain kind of torrents and stuff, at the same time, there's more people putting up free stuff than ever before. So it's like, you know, so I think it's not. I don't see it as a crisis from the.
Oh no, I mean, private trackers are both enclosing, but it's also a kind of a protection, you know, because you don't get public observation. For example, the government can't as easily follow a private tracker as it can a public tracker, so on.
I got a letter. I used to burn a lot of Dreamcast games back, you know, like everybody did. And it was especially important once Dreamcast games really stopped being so available, which is another one of the merits of piracy, right? Is it's like, you know, you don't have to deal with issues of, this is less of an issue now with digital distribution, but you don't have to deal with problems of distribution that can emerge within capitalism. But yeah, I got a letter at one point from Capcom USA. Oh, yeah. You know, because I know this great like Street Fighter, like Capcom made a lot of games on the Dreamcast. I got a letter from Capcom USA, and they were like, "Yeah, like if you keep downloading this stuff, we're gonna." They were like, "We're gonna take you to like a." It was a hilarious letter. They were like, "We're gonna take you to like a United States legal procedure," and I'm like, "I'm in Canada." Like, I'm just like, "Okay, guys, like whatever, man. If you can't send me like the right legal threat for my fucking country, like." Like I just have a lack of confidence that you're actually going to do that. Imagine Capcom actually like taking me to court in like California, trying to take me to court in like California.
Trying to get you like extradited, like a 17-year-old Canadian extradited for like doing...
Actually, that's dangerous because the way our government probably would extradite people for shit that's stupid. Like,
yeah. I mean,
you heard about the Huawei thing, right?
Oh yeah.
They just fucking arrested or what are you talking about?
Yeah, like which Huawei daughter of the chief financial officer of Huawei.
Yeah, they arrested her.
Yeah, like they arrested her in Canada and put her under house arrest. Like, and if I'm not mistaken, like the charge against her was that she was like doing business with Iran. Now this is hilarious, right? Because not only America has an embargo against Iran, right?
Yeah.
Or had an embargo or whatever.
Yeah.
But America doesn't respect jurisdictional laws, like when it comes to arrests for violation of embargoes. So, and she was in Canada. So the Americans told Canada to arrest the daughter of the chief financial officer of Huawei, transparently connected with the trade war that's going on. Mm-hmm. They told Canada to arrest the daughter of the CFO of Huawei for violating a U.S. sanction that does not exist in China, right? And Canada did it, right? This is incredibly depressing. And Justin Trudeau got up and he gave like a little thing. You know, some people have said that we're just slavishly following the orders of the United States. That is absolutely not true. You know, this is about Canada and its domestic interests, and we've made a decision. You know, we've looked at the documents. No one told us to do this. You know, and then like 1 week later, Trump got up and he was like, "Yeah, I told them. You know, they just listened to me. Like Justin, you know, he does exactly what I say." It was like totally sabotaged. So we did it, and then
that's so funny.
Then they just sabotaged the actual government that complied with them.
You gotta appreciate Trump's willing to undercut trust in the shady mechanisms of the U.S.
Yeah, just to like, you know, up his ego a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, but if we're talking about, just to say about
what happened with her, so she's arrested for violating an embargo with Iran, which doesn't exist in China, and she's arrested in Canada by the U.S. Okay.
That's my understanding of it. Like, I might have to dig into it, but I think right now, I believe now she's under house arrest in Vancouver in like a wealthy home or whatever, waiting for the U.S. extradition request to play out. Yeah. So the United States is talking about taking her and like just putting her in prison, I guess, indefinitely. Like you can't even make this stuff up. I mean, like, it's absolutely incredible, right?
Yeah, it is.
America doesn't fuck around, except with COVID.
Except with COVID. Well, that's because COVID, you know, it's not really directly affecting. I guess when masses of people die, it does affect capital, but I think the problem is it would involve a dialectical analysis to understand that like your action has direct impact on COVID spreading and these other negative consequences. Your action has these consequences within it, and there's mass action required. It's like America has such fidelity to the idea of freedom. It's like,
what do you mean negative freedom? Yeah.
No, I would say freedom is kind of negative. You could say positive freedom. Yeah, I know the discourse.
But positive freedom is like your freedom not to be affected by COVID.
Yeah, positive freedom to not be affected by COVID, freedom from COVID. Problems,
which is different than your freedom just to go around and like infect other people. It's like positive freedom would be the restriction.
Yeah, but California, let's talk. Yeah, even just California, where I'm at.
Sure.
Especially Los Angeles, the freedom from consequences, you could say, of governmental things to run smoothly for everybody. That's sort of what we have an idea of freedom. So when things go wrong within California and Los Angeles, the number one thing to do is, paint over. And that's sort of our idea of freedom. It's just freedom from things changing from running smoothly. Mm-hmm. Right. That's our main, you could say, concern, which is we want things to run smoothly. I don't think other countries have that quite as much as we do, but I know the U.S. maybe to some degree, but yeah, that's how our entire sort of system works in the state. I don't think it's not quite the same in New York. I think people are willing to critique on the East Coast maybe a little bit more, and people are willing to sort of challenge the sort of smooth flow, but California especially is very much within this kind of flow mentality, fidelity to the spectacle. Like the spectacle, Los Angeles, home of the spectacle, is like is the highest good. Like in terms, you get into this philosophical question of the good, and the good sort of society kind of decides that together that the spectacle of everything running smoothly is the highest good, and your part in your enjoyment of it is the highest good, right? Rather than say not dying of COVID.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar here in Mexico. I mean, here in northern Mexico, southern Mexico probably, like you say, just like eastern United States has its own proclivities. But here in the northern Mexico, which is the most industrialized part, they have that same vibe.
Yeah. It might just be a philosophical problem in general, like, philosophical problem, but also governmental problem with liberalism in general, which is this fetishization of individualist idealism in the form of freedom from regulation, right?
Yeah, negative freedom. Yeah. And that's the difference. Like, so the other day we were talking about a bit in the group because Matt wrote an article stressing the connections and continuity between liberalism and Marxism, which I think there are a lot of. But there was someone, Donald Parkinson, who is sort of a scholar of Marx, young guy.
Cosmonaut, man.
Yeah. And he expressed the view that Marxism was developed out of the rupture between liberalism and republicanism that took place in 1793, right? So in the kind of upheaval of the French Revolution, right? And the story of the French Revolution, the story of the French Revolution, like, the bourgeois try to have this revolution, then they kind of fail, and then they have to be like, oh shit, can like the popular masses come and bail us out? And they'll never live that down in France.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
It was a great like humiliation, right? That they had, and this is what created the, this is what sort of generates Robespierre as a historical figure, because he was the class forces that supported him were not just bourgeois class forces, right? And this is also what drove his radicalism. There were a lot of forces amongst the bourgeois who were a lot more congenial to compromise, right? With the monarchy, with the church, and so on, right? But him becoming like a spokesperson for sort of the downtrodden, right? It lent itself to this more, in a way, it was like a way of this was the sort of, Benjamin talks about like divine violence, right? This is in a way what was keeping these people supporting what was going on, right? Because in order to keep the lower class sort of on side with the revolution, right, they also had to like internally self-revolutionize, right, and totally repudiate, right, and you have this really crazy, like you have like Mirabeau, Danton, Robespierre, and they get more radical each time, right? But they had to intensify their commitment to like a dramatic change of society,
Right.
So that's kind of, but yeah. So sorry. What they were saying was that Marxism sort of develops out of this break, right? And republicanism is the stress on, positive freedom, like, the freedom, to not have to worry that you don't have running water, the freedom to not have to negotiate complex private Medicare insurance claims and details, right? Whereas negative freedom is just like, I can just do what I want, right? And I had this discussion with Nina Power, actually, who's been very controversial.
I feel bad. I shat post on her Twitter the other day. I was like,
did you? What did you say?
I was like, and I had such good rapport with her. Well, there you go.
I mean, I have to trash like the DC Miller, Justin Murphy, Nina Power crew with some regularity. So if it's not Murphy, we can. But I had this. I had this discussion with her, and I really like Nina's like early work. By the way, I like the old Nina. Her work on like one-dimensional woman, and like her essay on philosophical subjectivity and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like we had this discussion, and she was like, she was talking about kind of cancel culture and stuff, and she was like, oh well, in the 90s it was like so much cooler, like everyone just had this very like nice rapport, and like we weren't like canceling each other and stuff.
Yeah.
And now she's like, the right is so much more open than the left. Like in the right, they say all kinds of crazy things. She's like, you're allowed to say that. Like, and I was just like, but this is like monumentally naive in a way. I mean, even with the trans issue, it's like the right in America has really, really deeply attached itself to negative freedom, right? But it's like, so she's like, oh, isn't it paradoxical that the left like says they're so open, but they cancel everyone? And it's like, yeah, Nina, but some people would consider it like paradoxical that you position yourself as a feminist and you say trans people don't really have a right to exist, right? So it's not just about, it's not just about the freedom to like say what I want, right? It's also like, what are the actual implications of what you're saying and encouraging, right?
Yeah.
How does that affect people's freedom in a different way, right? Also, just in general, I just want to say about the American right, Steve Bannon was fired as editor of Breitbart because he wrote a book that was critical of Trump in certain ways, which like I cannot imagine like you being like a CNN and you write a book that's like critical of Obama and they fire you.
In some ways, right?
Yeah, in some ways, because he's like obviously Bannon is an anti-Trump, right?
Yeah.
But like Trump got mad about it, and then Breitbart fired him because they couldn't risk like losing their privileged access, which was deemed to be at some point more important than Bannon, right? I find it very hard to imagine CNN doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's bourgeois idealist, petty bullshit. I mean, that's the right raises up, petty bourgeois idealism, which is you don't bother people, you say the right thing, you're institutionalized, systematized in a certain way, and what they say is, well, we uphold that hierarchy is just, but what they're really doing is they're upholding this petty mode of existence. It's not, and it's weird because the right likes to think of themselves as within the to Nina Blocknester. I don't know.
No, I think that was the
other. But so the right likes to think of themselves as like within the essential idealism, right? Starting from Ayn Rand, she likes to think herself of an idealist contra the material. And then current right-wing thinkers, and even you could say Nazis, like to think of themselves as esoteric in some way. But ultimately what it comes down to in your day-to-day material life is that all is kind of thrown away in favor of regular bourgeois petty interactivity. Even you could say at the highest levels of the Nazi party, where Hitler gets involved with his highest officers' marriages, because the marriages have to go down a certain way, and so then it's like, Hitler's getting involved with my marriage. I guess I better listen to him about what to do. But that gesture is what the right might point to as like being in touch with your sort of day to day. But it's also a sort of symptom of the fact that there's nothing higher for the right than petty interactivity, and there is no ability to then move to essentialism. It is about bootlicking. It's about bootlicking. It's about being slavishly adherent to doctrine, right or wrong. That's what the right ultimately gets filtered down to.
Yeah.
IMO TBH fan, in my opinion.
I just want to respond to this. So Ender Wiggin says, I think in an interview with a Vietnamese general, someone asked him what were the consequences of the French Revolution. He said it's too soon to tell. Okay, a couple of things about that. That wasn't a Vietnamese general. That was an exchange between Henry Kissinger and Lin Biao when Nixon and Mao met in the thawing of U.S.-Chinese relations in the 70s. Henry Kissinger, he said to Lin Biao, what do you think the consequences of the French Revolution will be? When was their meeting? What was the year? Does anyone know? Mao-Nixon meeting, was it 68 or was it like the first year of their meeting? 1972, yeah. So Henry Kissinger said to Lin Biao, what do you think the consequences of the French Revolution will be? And Lin Biao said it's too early to tell. And Henry Kissinger used to tell this story. He was like, oh my God, like how like 40 chess is this guy, right? But then I guess it later turned out that apparently Lin Biao thought he was talking about the May 68 uprising in France, not the actual French Revolution. So he responded, it's too early to tell. But Zizek actually talks about this and says, like, he gives it as an example of a kind of like unconscious correct thing, right? That he didn't know what he was saying, but he still
said the right thing.
Yeah. Sort of like the what is this, like? I can't believe it. It's like a Cleopatra's nose. What is it? What do they call this in Hegel? It's the ruse of reason, right? The way that truth is articulated, right? Even when and Zizek has this sort of subconscious approach to taking that up. But I just want to say about COVID, because we're talking about COVID in the States. Yeah, I mean, this is really about temporality, isn't it? And well, what I mean is like, when you have like a highly consumerist private economy, right? That actually, even compared to like, a more centralized public economy, state capitalist economy, if you will. I can't say this without, okay. This changes the temporality of production and consumption, right? So for example, like the focus, as there's been less and less public investment and more focus in like consumer sectors that are like last minute delivery, for example, right? Or like things which are like low cost tourism in Europe, for example, right? Building all these airports and everything, right? But the problem is like if all consumption is kind of if the whole economy is based on consumption and especially last minute consumption, right? Immediate consumption, making consumption always accessible. Like you can do it anywhere. You don't even have to punch your numbers in your card. You just go on Google Store, whatever. The problem with that is it makes the economy very susceptible to spontaneous contraction, right? Because if that temporality is disrupted in any way, it all falls apart.
Yeah.
Right?
Say a pandemic or something.
Yeah. So, but also actually, a recession in general, right? Because if you have like government, if you have government investing, there's like a regularity and fixity to that, right? It's a different kind of temporal structure, right? But if you have people who are like switching stocks they're investing in all the time, right? That's extremely susceptible to failures of confidence, right? So there's a problem in a way when you speed things up to that degree, right? And that can be an issue. So what I meant is like the States is more than a lot of places. The countries that fared the best in 2007, 2008 were like Scandinavian countries because their economies were in a sense stabilized by the amount of public spending they had. Like the States got hit very hard. China really saved the US ass. Yanis Varoufakis talks about that in the video that was published. It's great. Varoufakis on Chinese imperialism.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
Great video. Varoufakis, brilliant guy. And this also, it's interesting because this video also suggests a lot of people in our group effectively do not understand the difference between like imperialism and like neo-colonial soft power or something.
Yeah,
But
I had a whole discussion with some guys from Monterrey
They
about
don't-
the same thing.
Yeah. They don't understand the difference between imperialism and neo-colonial soft power.
It's basic.
Tell me the difference. I of course know it like the back of my hand, but explain it to me like I'm just a total fucking idiot. Yeah,
well, so Varoufakis is like, he's like, China is not an imperialist country.
yeah.
Right? And what he means by that, right? And of course, like anything like this is going to end up in a discussion of degrees. But what he means by that is that they don't use like the threat of like military conquest, to advance their.
Yeah, there's a great comment in that same video.
Yeah.
Can I quote it? Okay, so it's from Malaysia, right? And it says, "We have traded with China for thousands of years. They came and they left, and not once they brought their battleships nor their army to colonize us. When the first Portuguese ships came, we traded with them. Then they went back to Europe, and they came back with warships and soldiers and colonized us. We fought back. Then the Dutch came. We traded with them. Then they came back with warships and soldiers and colonized us, and we fought them back. Then the British came to trade, and we traded with them. Then they returned with warships and soldiers, and they colonized us, and we fought back."
Did you say that's from like Malaysia?
Yeah, Malaysia. Yeah.
At a certain point, you'd think like when the British came after all that, they would have been like, "This looks familiar."
Yeah.
It's not. I guess capitalism. Capitalism like, ooh, like make some money right now. Versus like, wait, this is the third European country. They tend to, as soon as you trade with them, bring in warships and then take over everything. However, I understand that that's bad. However, I can make a lot of money like selling this to them right now.
Well, the Japan obviously got the message, right? Because they were just
Japan wasn't stupid,
more.
of course.
Yeah,
They
more.
just let the Dutch in briefly, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just got a whiff of it, and they're like, no.
Yeah.
No.
Bye.
Yeah.
I mean, that was their sort of peculiar genius, right? They just simultaneously, like, it's a weird act to on one hand totally close your country, and on the other focus on like aggressively westernizing like every sector of your economy. Again, like the closest parallel today would probably be China. But again, like the degree of solitude that Japan would have enjoyed in that historical period is totally incomparable to what China's going through today. I'm a bit hesitant to like use these, like, because China often uses these like cultural explanations. They're like, we're not imperialists, and it's like, well, I mean, if you read like Lenin or something, like imperialism is something that's a part of capitalism. So I don't actually, like, I wouldn't dismiss the possibility that China will like become imperialist in the future. I just think that they haven't really. I don't think they've really developed to the point where they're really able to do that.
Well, they only have one foreign military base. So in terms of imperialism, that's coming with the warships, you could say, and it's in Djibouti. Do you think they did that on purpose? They picked the one that sounded the funniest.
Maybe.
I don't know why they did that. They're just like, we're not gonna have any military bases. Okay, we're gonna have one military base, and it's gonna be in Djibouti.
I read some interesting facts. I was going through about China. I finished a 1,000-page book on Deng Xiaoping, and I put up some quotes in the group, like the one where Jiang Zemin was dealing with democracy protesters, and he had them on stage to talk, and then he was like, no, he's like, your views on like democracy are naive, and they've only been grasped in translation. So then he proceeded to read to recite from memory the entire Gettysburg Address by Lincoln in English, to like kind of one up the like pro-democracy protesters. He's like, I understand democracy. But yeah, I was reading a book. It's interesting. Sorry,
it's very non. It's, I said, it's so classic. It's just very. You can tell there's the cultural difference between the East and the West is just so. It's always interesting to me. Like the idea of a president memorizing something to like show that the president has some knowledge that you never see that from a Western power, like the idea that knowledge would be the trump card.
From a Latin American power, probably, but not
maybe. Yeah, Latin American power more so. in terms of knowledge is
There was actually
sort
a
of
very
held
funny
by
thing that happened
power.
recently.
Yeah.
So Marx, you guys have noticed that he sings the praises of former Mexican President Benito Juarez, right? Because of he abolished peonage, so on. He was an indigenous president, by the way. But anyway, moving past that, so our current president in the recent UN addresses that a lot of presidents gave, I'm sure you guys saw Trump's, it was magnificent. He mentions Benito Juarez, right? And he goes on and on a little bit about him because he loves Benito Juarez. And one of the things he mentions is that he was so transcendental that many people, Ender knows what I'm talking about. Many people were named after him, including Benito Mussolini. Right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he brings it up like a sort of an ironic comment, because, I mean, Benito Mussolini, named after Benito Juarez, that's pretty funny. But people gave him so much shit about it here in Mexico. That's pretty funny, also.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's like here, Benito Juarez. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
When was Benito
Juarez
president?
Late 19th century.
Yeah. Around 1867. I'll look it up. So
was Mussolini really named after?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And he was from Oaxaca, like a poor Zapotec family. Benito Juarez.
He was president from 1857 to Mexican president, 1858 to 1872. So a while.
Okay, and he was sort of like a Republican, right? It looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so strong like focus on like secularism and like, sort of like a certain kind of working class sensibility as well as it would seem, and the building up infrastructure and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's a reason why this social democrat president really, really loves exalting Juarez, because he's trying to bring that back into the fold.
Okay, it's interesting because Mussolini started as a socialist, right? So that suggests maybe he came from a family that also harbored those views, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was a communist, and then he was like, "What if I just
if I wasn't?
What if I just didn't do the reading?"
Interesting. I've never met anyone. We've never had a special guest like that on our show.
Mussolini. Are you trying to say Justin was like having Mussolini on?
Not quite Mussolini, but I do think he's someone who kind of like is interested in Marxism but hasn't really like worked it all out. So it's like it just kind of because the thing is like he talks about like the deficiencies in Marx's work, but I would argue that Marx's work like also gives the answer to most of the so-called conundrums that Murphy's describing, like if you understand it well enough. So it's kind of strange like to talk about like I'm not really sure about the problem of Marx's work that Murphy's proposals solve.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's all kind of thinkers on the right, libertarian or capitalist thinkers, they have a fatalism of capital, which you then pay, you subscribe to the capitalism as inevitable and natural, and then you sort of you theorize from there, right? Versus, so the idea of like critiquing any processes of capital then becomes really impossible, because it seemed like what the idea is, if you critique, why critique? I might just be saying the obvious, but that's sort of what happens if you don't if you don't actually do the reading and just want to call yourself a communist.
It's interesting. It's interesting in the English world because we don't really have any. I don't think there's any real radical political movements in the sense that if we talk about these sort of sacred dogmas, it's like if you look at the sacred dogma of the right, it's in capitalism, right, being completely unavoidable, right, as a form of organization. Now that's I would say that's certainly shared by centrist Democrats, but if you look at the far left of the Democratic Party, they may not believe in the inexorability of capitalism in that way, but they do believe they do kind of I would say reify a certain vision of deliberative politics, right? Or sort of democratic deliberative politics, right? That becomes kind of like the only horizon or sort of basis upon which meaningful organization can occur, right? And I think you recently you see some of the problems with that, right? Because Zizek has said, for example, that he's like, where is Sanders now when all this stuff's going down in the United States? And he's like, in a way, maybe he's not radical enough, right? The actual commitment to deliberative politics, and we see this now with, it's really strange, even with Jacobin. Like I saw an article in Jacobin that was saying it was like trying to refute this comparison between Biden and FDR. They're like, think Biden's going to be like FDR. They're like, think again. And it went through this whole argument, and it attributed this comparison between Biden and FDR to, quote, liberal pundits, without ever mentioning anywhere in the article that it was Bernie Sanders himself who first made that comparison, right? Which is getting quite, that's getting quite like Pravda in Russia style like reporting, right?
Biden is like actively trying to erase all traces of Bernie from the discourse, certainly.
Well, I guess what I mean is that like, like even when Jacobin goes to refute positions that are held by Bernie, the concession made is that they do so without ever mentioning that it's actually Bernie they're arguing against, right? So it's an interesting. But I just meant to say here that I think you potentially see, and I just finished a big piece on this, but I think you potentially see the limitations of deliberative politics. I mean, I think the basic, the sort of central fallacy, I think, which, and it's productive fallacy, but a fallacy, I think, nonetheless, that the DSA's praxis has relied on is the idea that in every American, there's like a secret socialist. It's just like, it's like, doesn't everybody love libraries? Like, like nobody likes complex tax insurance claims. And it's like, well, that helped them, right? It was productive because obviously the socialist left in the States is much stronger today than it was 4 years ago.
Right.
But what do we do about this commitment to deliberative politics if it should turn out?
It's very negative. DSA has this very negative, petty politic to it in terms of like their campaigns. Or one of their campaigns they're advocating for now is just the tax the rich campaign. I don't know for what. I think it's sort of these empty, punitive, super ego kind of jolts rather than
like a constructive proposal.
I rarely get inspired by a DSA thing. Maybe tips Fedora. Maybe that's my own internal failing, right? But I don't think
it's your internal failing. I think this idea, this commitment to deliberative politics went hand in hand with the idea that we could just parachute somebody in and like liberal voters would support him because actually liberals have a lot in common. This is sort of my position on Matt's piece about Marxism and liberalism and the relationship. I agree. That's true from a historical standpoint. I'm still skeptical about the way those arguments are used now, right? And the kinds of political projects that, like what it might mean to write something about that and put it in Jacobin, not the actual historical argument, which I think is fair. But I guess, I think one thing, like to commit to deliberative politics is also to posit that it's possible to win through deliberative politics, right? Win democratically, right? And in practice, the way that these people identified that they were going to win was through liberal socialist coalition, right? Through, getting the libs on side, which means stressing and playing up the similarities between socialism and liberalism.
Which is such a weak point, because then all you're doing is emphasizing, every time you say liberals and socialists want the same thing, you're just emphasizing that there is a division rather than putting forward, the socialist sort of vision.
Well, I think another issue here is that liberal positions, it's very clear what segment of American society they appeal to in terms of income, right? So the idea was always like revolution without revolution, in the sense that, I mean, very obviously, but in the sense that like, oh, well, upper income, socially mobile liberal voters will get behind Sanders if we just like tell them that, okay, well, our values are sort of the same. Okay. And it's like, well, did that work? No. Right?
Not at all. Yeah.
And in fact, this was remarkable how the amazing efforts that were undertaken by the liberal side to undermine Sanders, no one has ever dropped out in a Democratic primary when they were doing as well as Buttigieg was prior to Super Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
So if you can maybe, there's a couple approaches you can derive from this. One thing you could derive is that maybe Democratic political organization has to try to cut through Trump country and stop stressing this notion of coalition with liberals and pursue another route, because a lot of Americans are, that's one way. Another way is you could just say, like, look, America's political system is so annexed by corporate actors that that's just like, we're never going to be able to get a socialist majority this way.
Yeah.
Right. And if you accept that, right, then that means you have two choices. One is you commit yourself to piecemeal reforms, right? In which case you really cease to be different in any meaningful way from establishment Democrats.
Right.
And two is that you commit yourself to, I would say, the redemptive power of violence, is what I would call it, right? The way that in the past, like, these kind of violent movements always emerge from a kind of short circuit where you have a political idea, but you can't build a majority around it. And deliberation isn't going to work, right? So you have like a potent idea, it has support, but the conditions just aren't right, So if you look at the Bolsheviks in Russia, sure, or the Chinese Communist Party, I mean, the same allegations that are made by, certain people like in the DSA against sort of tankies or whatever, more revolutionary ML types, was made against those guys. Oh, they're bloodless. Oh, they don't understand political reality, and so on, right? But it's like those parties succeeded because deliberative politics didn't work, right? Like, that was the void that allowed them to step in, right? And nobody, like, what's similar about the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, liberalism and democracy are the same thing. Like, I think people don't really get that, and that's why I think DSA is kind of forever doomed, because democracy and liberalism are two sides of the same coin. The bourgeois apparatuses work in order to create a bourgeois democratic, financially liberal majority. That is why you see states like China and Vietnam, violent revolutions create communism and socialism. Not that I'm advocating for that in the U.S. It seems like a fruitless effort at this moment. But more to think about what does it mean to be a socialist in the U.S. and maybe it's not through the DSA or elections.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's my thought. Deep state labor. I like deep state labor. That idea from Pamu.
Deep state labor.
What is it?
The Pamu people had a fake election, and they had fake political parties, and one of the political parties was deep state labor. And I said, that's a great idea. But then they, like, some guy who basically what's called schizo posting will just post like kind of random word salad that doesn't relate to a lot of things, and that was the deep state labor. But the idea that socialism in the United States, what is it really going to look like? I don't know. I think people want it to be the DSA, and if that's the case, I would really like to see, I don't know, the DSA care about, I don't know, labor reform and poverty. It seems like the DSA doesn't necessarily have any visions beyond regular social democratic reforms. I would love the DSA to have something like a large scale structural vision for the United States and what that would mean, and to lift people out of poverty, like in terms of to get people from the public school system to college or a trade to work at a job that's protected, and to actually advocate for proletarian class empowerment to a certain degree. And I think that's what the DSA should be used for, if it was used for anything in terms of the the American. Maybe that's just something I'll have to like type up it to like make sure like it's like, well, it's, what should the DSA be used for, if anything, and then what should how should something like that be accomplished is kind of, I don't know. I think it could easily be accomplished. Yeah. I think it could be even accomplished in conjunction with a liberal, although it would be difficult because then you'd have to, the idea of this education pathway, is it going to be free for all people to go to college or trade school? Yeah, that'd be nice. Or you can even have a model where your trade pays back the college, but it's like kind of set exactly like a sort of set like a union would be set. But I just don't think that the DSA or electoral socialism in the U.S. has that capability at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you
what's probably going to happen, in my opinion, over the next few years in the American left. I think the American left is going to be subject to a very, very strong split. One thing that went hand in hand with this idea of like, and by the way, one of the reasons I sort of like Burgess in a way is that he kind of, I think, takes this idea of, deliberatively, how could we get outside of these more bourgeois positions? I think there may be contradictions between, the kind of position he's advocating for and the means he advocates for doing it, but it's interesting nonetheless.
But I know he's very much of the DSA. He's like a DSA rep and all that. So I know he would want to do that. But also, like,
I look through Canceling Comedians, and he is critical of a lot of DSA positions. So, and he criticizes stuff about class reductionism. So he is working within those mechanisms, but I think he's trying to push them in a positive way. That may not be able to succeed, but it's like, okay. If you want to look at, I think, what's going to happen in the American left in the next few years, I think you're going to see a sort of, because I think things are going to get really crazy with COVID, with uprisings and everything and all this. And I think this is going to drive a certain segment of the American left, combined with the failure of Sanders, to say, fuck sort of deliberative politics. Let's go really try to do something. Right. And, one thing that's happened already with the DSA and these organizations is there's been a certain level of embourgeoisement that's went hand in hand with the idea of liberal socialist coalition. And
but that's what democracy does. I agree. You can't escape the sort of bourgeois politics of the DSA.
Well, I thought
abstract idealism of it.
I thought the flack being attracted by Nathan J. Robinson was very symptomatic of awareness of this. I don't think people were just mad because of Nathan J. Robinson. I think people were upset, on Twitter and all this stuff. Every time he goes out and claims that we need socialism absent Marxist ideas or something. I think what they're frustrated by is that he's symptomatic of something quite risky, right? And all these people got their kind of Willy Wonka, suits on. They got all dressed up, and they went to their sort of victory party, but the victory didn't happen and nobody showed up, right? So I think what's going to happen in the next few years is you're going to see on one side, you're basically like, I think as that DSA style of politics begins to seem less palpable, I think that you're going to see people basically splitting between people who commit themselves to a strongly like piecemeal reformist agenda, like liberal integrationism, and people who are going to align themselves with the severity of the upheavals that emerge. Right?
Or just hear me out. We read State and Revolution. We decide that democratic politics are intrinsically bourgeois, as outlined by Lenin. Then we take productive forces, align with the Chinese Communist Party, and create socialism in a very treasonous manner within the United States, and get the backing of Leninist institutions, and then be subject to massive United States scrutiny. All the while, we're building socialism in the United States. Just throwing it out there.
He doesn't actually believe that. In case there's any NSA people watching this or whatever.
I don't. Just because I actually believe that doesn't mean that I actually believe that.
Fair
It's
enough.
very Hegelian, and yeah.
Imagine, I think China would have to be pretty confident that something like that could succeed if they're ever going to.
China would have to trust Westerners to do something for some reason. I don't know why they would do that.
I just don't think it's really I don't see them wanting to get involved in that, and you know, but I don't know. Maybe if things got crazy enough, you know, that would be crazy, right? Because China was in this big civil war for decades. So it'd be crazy, like if China was like the stable country, like in America was just in like.
Well, there's lots of Zoomer Communist Party people, you know, get them involved in terms of socialist projects in the United States. You might not might not get the current ruling party, but you know, you never know.
Yeah.
Is there a chance
This is what Zero Book's Capital Comrades is about. This is what it's about. It's about.
This is what the powers that be fear.
This is what Zero Book's Capital Comrades is about. This is what it's about. It's about, to me, it's about trying to help cultivate, especially younger people who are interested in Marx, to kind of prevent them going, again, kind of in the Nosbol direction. You know, we still want to have a very radical agenda. But, you know, it's like even to critique something like the DSA and its style of politics, you have to acknowledge a lot of the good things that have been done. You know, and, you know, it's not like, even if we give this analogy, it's not like Lenin, you know, didn't think Kautsky was like, you know, brilliant, like his writings prior to 1914. You know, he's like, he's the greatest Marxist thinker in the world, right? And he distills a lot of that. So I don't think that moment of rupture has really arrived, you know, but I'm just saying that I think we have to be very, very appreciative and really recognize the good of what's been accomplished, you know, in the past.
Or we don't.
Eliot's good. No, I do. No, I really respect. I have great respect for, you know, and I have a lot of good friends who hold positions that are more institutional with respect to that. You know, I think ultimately right now it's, you know, like it's quite early because like to talk about this sort of division is to talk about what's going to happen in the future. Right. Yeah. More than what's already happened.
The idea that the left will somehow exist through democratic politics, you know, maybe. I mean, we might get we might get something close to a quarter of what the German center-right party has, is like my kind of feeling about it. And what we're really going to have is we're going to have identitarian republicanism, where you're going to get people who are in oppressed, you could say, racial groups, gender groups, sexual groups, simply embodying the bourgeois, you know, stuff of the day. And like you have, like even look at the Squad. I mean, the Squad is already the start of that with some vague radical politics, right? Anyway, so I'm very suspect of, you know, the DSA's ability to.
I'll put it this way. I'll put it this way, Eliot. Like when I say appreciative. Even if, you know, even if we go back and even if we say, oh, well, whatever the DSA was doing, they were never going to get their electoral socialist majority, right? The fact is that, like, it's not bad to pursue that. Like, it's not necessarily bad to push that as far as you can, right?
Right.
When you realize that's not going to work, right? You know, I think the left has really enlarged its cultural footprint in America in the past few years, right? I think a lot of the people going out there, you know, being very active in civil demonstrations and so on, you know, or in civil demonstrations as the case may be. I think a lot of them are people who, you know, had looked to, not everyone, but I think a lot of them are people who'd like look to Sanders to give some kind of deliverance that didn't come. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, you know, it's like you kind of have this, you know, Obama kind of got people in that generation thinking politically. Obviously that was a gratuitous disappointment in a lot of respects, you know, and then Sanders came along and that was left to that. You know, and it's like, well, maybe we can make the next step now. God knows things are bad enough, warranted. But I'm saying I just want to say that, you know, it's a process, and the things which are closer to the end that we may have to resort to, you know, are going to be more interesting and compelling. So what I meant is that, you know, I still think, you know, that's this process of democratic mobilization was probably very positive, no matter the outcome. I mean, you know, electorate, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, for example, here in Mexico, we have a social democratic president, and that didn't solve anything at all. He even has his own party. So something that I'm very concerned in the United States is that you guys only have, I mean, you have several parties, right? But you only have like two really actual, like relevant.
We only have two parties.
Yeah.
Two parties.
Right.
We have third parties. They're called derogatorily.
Yeah. Yeah. So here in Mexico, we have our third parties. And right now, the third party, which was founded literally like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, it currently holds the majority in the Senate and the Congress, right? But that didn't solve anything either, because these are just bourgeois political actors who they realized that they didn't have anything to win by sticking with their past parties, and they just jumped ship, right? But what we actually have to do is build an actual democratic control of the parties. I mean, of that party in particular, right? To educate people and to actually instill left-leaning values. Because even if it's a social democratic party, they're still against abortion, for example, and they're still against female rights, like, in general. They're still conservative.
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad that I'm not right now at the top of one of these hierarchies, because these sort of left hierarchies in this way, because, you know, normally the more, and this is generally true of organizations, the higher you go, with even in the left, right, the more right-wing people are as you get higher. And, you know, I mean, I think the good thing is, like, you know, it's interesting. I mean, one thing, Deng Xiaoping, a hyperbolic example, but Deng Xiaoping, he part of the reason he was able to kind of do stuff in China was because, like, he had been, you know, actually exiled during the Cultural Revolution, right? So I meant, you know, for me or for anyone, I'm saying, you know, who's maybe had more radical views, who hasn't, you know, been functioning, you know, as such a visible party in these kind of discourses. You know, I mean, you know, history may change, and you know, it may favor those kind of expressions, or maybe not, and that's just narcissistic. I don't know. But, you know, and I think all these discussions and the people who've been involved, you know, I think a lot of the people here, you know, maybe it's similar, right? And that's the idea. I think it's like we're trying to develop here, like, a kind of thought that can break out of these molds.
Yeah, I think when you go to like China, or you like think of China, you know, there's all these sort of socialisms being developed without the fetter of liberal democracy, bourgeois liberal democracy, and it really really makes me lose the taste for it. Although, you know, there are some benefits from the ideal of democratic socialism and what that will look like, which is what, you know, it's what we got here in the U.S. We'll see.
All right, well, I gotta get going, guys.
Yeah, it's an hour and a half. We're at the time.
We can wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. This has been Zero Books Basement, discussing capital, the first part of the appendix, and let's give the sort of let's give the page numbers.
Right. Next, it's 1019 or 1019. I don't know how you guys speak in English. All the way to 1084.
Okay, 1019 to 1084 in the Penguin Folks translation of Capital Volume 1. Thank you, guys. This has been Eliot Rosenstock, the imaginary, Conrad Hamilton, the symbolic, and Ernesto Vargas, the real. Thank you, and we will see you next week.
Bye.